I think we're about to get started. How's everyone doing? What'd you guys think of Devs on Stage? Got a couple cheers. Okay, that's exciting. I was actually pretty thrilled because there's a few of the things that I knew before and a few of them that I didn't quite know exactly, but I was really excited to be able to say that we can finally announce it and talk publicly about some of the things that we've been hiding secretly for a long time. But there's a lot of dad jokes throughout Devs on Stage, so I'm sure we can all appreciate some of those. So to get started, first off, my name is Kevin Mason. I'm the product manager for web authoring here at Tableau. I've actually been at Tableau for 3 years. I started a couple projects. The first ones were on our visual design language. So if you've ever heard of Google Material UI, we did the Tableau version of that. And then I also worked on a little bit of our sample workbooks. So Superstore, if you've ever heard of that, I played around a little bit with that for a while. Before all of that, I actually I was a swimmer for 13 years. So national level at 17, and I was coached for 5. And 2 of those coaching years, I was the head coach running a club of 200 people with a staff of 6. I'm gonna actually share a little bit of stories throughout the presentation, add a bit of a different flair. But today's talk, I mentioned it a little bit earlier for those who came in right away. It's gonna be a little bit different. So I've talked to about 50 customers over the last year and a bit. And ironically, it's really hard to find all of the different resources, specifically around self-service, but also web authoring. There's either too much or it's just hard to understand like what steps you need to take next. So today I really had 2 goals. The first one is ensuring that this presentation can be a resource for you to use afterwards and take an actionable next step right after conference. So it's almost like a roadmap in some ways. The other thing I wanted to do is have a flavor of web authoring. So talk a little bit about where web authoring might fit for self-service for you. The talk's gonna be a little bit different. Half of this is gonna be me presenting, and then we're gonna actually bring up folks from Tableau and actually a previous customer to talk about their specific experiences. So write down your questions, cross them out. We're gonna cover a bunch of topics. We won't be able to dive into detail with a lot of them. I'll mainly point to them and reference other talks to look at afterwards. But if that's a topic of interest, write it down and bring it up, because then we can talk about it afterwards during Q&A. If you'd like the presentation, that's my email. Please do write it down. Unfortunately, we can't reach out to you for data privacy reasons with the app, so feel free to just send me an email, and I can send the presentation out with all of the links as we go. Sound good? Okay. So at Tableau, we like to start at the high level. At the end of the day, it's all around people. And for us, building a culture of analytics is the first thing that we start to think about. We believe that people should be who have the context of the data should be the ones that have access and have the ability to answer those questions. Second, we see software should be designed for deeper thinking. And on the development team, we constantly think of this balance between software doing the heavy lifting, but mainly wanting to guide you in the right direction, either with your questions or helping get to your answers faster. And third, was all around, we found a lot of customers have a ton of success once they've expanded this culture beyond their entire organization. But it's really hard to do. And especially, how can you ensure those best practices, even in a small project, continue to live on as we get bigger? Funny enough for me, these 3 things were what immediately drew me to Tableau during my journey when I started as a swim coach. So for swimming, we were proud of the fact that we won state championships 5 years in a row. But why we were actually successful was because we cared about the individuals and focused on building lifelong athletes. Our goal was to ensure that the swimmers had a well-rounded athleticism overall, growing physically, but they were also set up well mentally and had the right emotional and social benefits as well from the club. So we didn't just focus on the folks who wanted to go to the national level, we also wanted to focus on some of those swimmers who came there because their friends were there. So how did we do it at Tableau? Well, it was actually all around these 3 words, which shockingly mirrored very closely to the themes at Tableau. Build was all about building a culture of a lifelong athlete. Balance was around setting up the right tools for coaches to be able to support both the people who wanted to go fully competitive, but also those who wanted to be more social or have it as a second sport. And fit was ensuring that we were setting up the right best practices so we could continue to grow the club beyond just 200 people, even 5 years down the road, or as new coaches come in. We're going to actually walk through each of these 3 sections through the presentation and give you a little bit of the analogies, how it ties back to self-service and web authoring. To play along a little bit, you can think of a head coach kind of like a server admin, setting up the environment for people to be successful. A coach is kind of like the analyst, building the reports or providing the tools for other people to use. Those other people in this case are going to be swimmers. From an organizational perspective, swimming doesn't really have HR and marketing, but each coach leads a certain group, and you can think of those as different age groups. Okay, starting with build. This is all about the new culture. When we started with coaching, the tough part is that each group ran independently. So some of the fundamental skills were missed or even repeated even as swimmers progressed up with age groups. And that was a bit of a challenge. We wanted something to be holistic, so each time they moved up to a group, they were learning new skills. We also wanted to allow some flexibility with coaches to address those social swimmers, but how were we going to do that? And how does this relate to self-service at all? Well, you can think about with Tableau, we have that traditional BI model we always talk about. People generating reports, and then if they have an additional question, they have to go to IT, similar to some coaches having to go to the head coach. Well, we care about 3 particular things when we think about self-service and moving in the direction. We've talked about having the people be able to ask and answer their own question. We've talked about sharing these insights across the organization with different people. But equally important, we also want to make sure people have the right level of access or the right data, similar to having the right drills and skills for certain swimmers. Another way to look at it is looking at 2 different groups. So on the left side, we have our IT group, traditional BI, focused on doing all of the reporting and the data governance. And on the right side, we have those business users. This is the model where typically people are always waiting for IT. The first iteration of self-service typically kind of looks like this. You have IT on the left side that's responsible for all of the data governance, ensuring that people have the right level of access, which is fantastic. And the business users are then responsible for reporting and doing those little ad hoc analysis. It seems great, but the challenge that we've started to hear about, especially in the field, is that these 2 groups are siloed. One is responsible for data governance, ensuring a source of truth, and the other wants to get to the bottom of the answer. So sometimes with desktop, this is where those local files get passed around, and it just creates a big mess. So what do you do? Well, this is where the 3rd iteration comes in, which we talk about as the modern enterprise analytics. This is where the 2 groups work together. They're all responsible for ensuring that the data is accurate, secure, and trusted. It comes from the right place. On one side, the IT group is responsible for both ensuring that they're providing the right data, but it may be a team of analysts also providing those reports that go out to everybody else in the organization. And on the other side, you still allow the flexibility for business users to do their one-off or very specific deep dive that they want to do, but it's separate from the reports that you have more broadly. Still referencing the same source of truth, still the right level of data, but now the people who are looking at it or looking at new visits can see the differences. So if self-service, if this is new and you're starting your journey here, these are some of the white papers and blogs that I started. Again, this is where send me an email. We're going to go a little fast through some of the references. Or if this is a topic you want to talk about more, write it down as a question for Q&A. There's also Tableau Blueprint. Definitely check out the booths. As it talked about the vision, this is a roadmap for you across your entire journey for self-service. Take a look. It'll be a great reference, and it's all available online. So you can look at it anytime. Okay, so we talked about the culture, which is all about build, but how do we set up the right tools for people to be successful? This is where we're going to talk a little bit about web authoring. So in swimming with the original model, we talked about the drills maybe not lining up. And for coaches particularly, it could be quite challenging because sometimes we couldn't share resources across and ensure that we were having the right, using the right language even sometimes. So how can we share that? Some of the pains that we've heard as people begin to expand, and specifically when we're thinking about desktop, these are some of the things that I've heard so far. The constant number of requests, similar to having that central analyst group. You still have business users asking you for one more thing. Managing the desktop licenses, devs on stage, we've talked a little bit about how we could solve that in the future. And more importantly, ensuring that those rogue workbooks or those single sources of truth don't get lost or are referencing the correct area. Kind of curious, what are some other ones that you've heard? What are some other challenges that you're experiencing with people? Yep. Don't have time to learn the software. Yeah, that's a good one. Give me the report. Don't want to learn it. Yep, that's a big one. Any others? Oh, we nailed it? No way. Yes? They just want to get the Excel, download the data. Give me something familiar. Oh, yeah. Any others that come up?
Version control. Some people have older versions that don't update.
Version control. Yeah, absolutely. Especially if you want to upgrade or have to worry about making sure that people are publishing the right one from desktop. Yep. Sorry, what was that? One more time? Yeah, upgrading desktop before server. Yeah, using new features before you can publish them. Well, here's another one. I got another one for you. Whose company is focusing on moving towards the cloud? We're going towards a full SaaS model. Yeah, trying to eliminate the desktop licenses. Definitely happens. These are some of the things that sometimes come up that lead towards some other options with web authoring. Here are some three ones that come up for us. So ad hoc analysis, you want to make sure that you still allow people to be able to do what they need to, whether that's Excel or not, but you want to have a safe place that IT can still see. So you can manage and say, like, nah, that's not the right source of truth, but it's okay to use, or maybe not. Another one, of course, is we talked about simple license management, whether that's disaster recovery or ensuring that people are aligned to the right version. And the third is around, again, highlighting the ones that are the sources of truth, whether that is a data source or whether that's a workbook. So we're going to walk through an example and talk a little bit about how to do this with the web authoring flavor. Before I do that, though, we've talked about desktop, web authoring, and Ask Data. Those three are what I would like to consider as our analytics platform. It doesn't have to be an or choice. You can use all of them, and that's really the goal and our dream, to be able to allow people to choose whichever one works best for them. So you have the flexibility. Today we're going to talk about web authoring. So I'm going to flap to a demo and give you a look into web authoring. All right. So here we're looking at Tableau online specifically, but Tableau server is the same. And this is the content management site that we have, so Spaces. Here we're looking at the RASA, which is the swim clubs folders. Here we have a personal sandbox, so where I can publish content that no one else can see. Over here we have what we call a coach's corner. So this is where we can share content as coaches that the swimmers can't see, and also be able to provide feedback for each other. And in the middle, we have this official swimmers vizzes. These are the ones that we're going to allow the swimmers to see because we vetted them as good to go. I'll talk a little bit more about folder structures later, but this is a similar theme to what you'll see there. So let's go into this official swimmers vizzes. And before I go and flop over to the next tab that I've loaded, big shout out to those who go to Tableau Public. These two vizzes are actually pulled directly from there. So thank you for contributing to the community. Okay, I'm going to go to the other tab. What we're looking here is we are viewing a dashboard. And in this dashboard, we're looking at the total Olympic medals across all countries. And if we scroll down, you can actually see that all the way dated back to 1896. Let's go to the next one. So on this next one, internet, there we go. On this next one, we can see that it's actually doing a medal count. Swimming is number one. Look at that for medal count. So one thing that I know about swimming is that in 2008, that was a big year. The reason why it was a big year is because the US won a bunch of golds. Let's see who won. Michael Phelps, Michael Phelps, Michael Phelps, Michael Phelps. This is the year he won 8 gold medals. 5 of them were individual. Now, I have a question. So as much as I love swimming and he was fantastic at the sport, was he the best overall individual athlete? So what if we were to include other sports? Was he that good, or was he just good at swimming? Well, this one right now, and the reason why I think I can answer that question is because I have the medalist, we know the medal that they won, and we have all of the years dating back to 1896. But this dashboard and the previous dashboard didn't allow me to answer that question. The third one might, but let's take a look. Maybe not. Okay, so for this one, it's going into a specific sport, and again, breaking it down by country. Even the marks aren't showing me the athletes. This is where, if you're using filters and parameters on a dashboard, it answers a fair amount of questions, but it won't answer all of the questions that some of your end users have. This is where web authoring can really play and answer that benefit. So we're going to go right into web authoring, and we're going to create a new sheet. Here we know that we want medalists, so we're going to drag that out into rows. And we also want to look at the medal and look at the count for medals. Change the aggregation to count. We don't want count distinct, because count distinct would just be gold, silver, bronze. So what's interesting here is it's countries. That doesn't quite make sense if we drag up medalist. Why is that the case? Well, if we put event onto detail and hover over one of them, okay, women's doubles, women's cock states, women's 4x100 relay. These are team events. I'm curious specifically about individual events. We want to compare Michael Phelps to other athletes. So I'm going to select United States, and let's scroll down and find the first individual athlete. Okay, Larissa. There we go. So we're going to select them and exclude. Scrolling back to the top. So here's Larissa. And where's the next person? Michael Phelps, look at that. Beating some countries for total medal count since the early 1900s. Now this is total medal count, and that's pretty great. I'm kind of curious, which country did each of these athletes have? You can see Nikolai is here, Boris, Alexei. I have a hunch, but I want to double check. I'm going to drag country group specifically. And the reason why I know that is just because I have context for the data, that it's blending things like the two Germanys in the past, and then USSR and Russia. This is where a description can really help out for your end users knowing that too. So you can see Russia's a dominant player, US is another dominant player, going down, Russia, 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 Japan, Finland. Okay, in the first dashboard we looked at, we knew United States and Russia were big dominant players. So we're just going to filter to Russia and United States, and keep those. Let's see what we have. Okay, so Michael Phelps may not have the total medal count overall, but we do know he won 8 golds, 5 of them individual. So let's see if he was dominating in terms of medal count for gold. Medal, onto color, and look at that. So Larissa had a lot of medals, but the total count was 6. Michael Phelps had a total count of 11 individual medals. That's not including relays. And if we look down even further, we can see Ray here from the United States also won 8 golds, pure gold. What we just discovered is we've been able to ask and answer way more questions than what the dashboard could have provided, even though it's using the exact same data source. The data source was vetted, it came from a source of truth, and I could discover a lot more. This is really where the power of web authoring can really help for the ad hoc analyst. And it doesn't have to come from just a report. Here we're looking at a data source, and it's in the coach's corner, which we'll look at back at in a minute. You can actually create a brand new workflow from scratch, directly connecting to this certified data source. Or you can even use Ask Data to get started and continue your flow later in web authoring. In the coach's corner, you can also have different templates. So you can have a blank template that actually starts off with some parameters that you may have cleaned up and allowed users to use, or something more structured. So this one is around tracking best times over a long period of time. These are some of the things that, actually these templates specifically, as we swap back, actually come from these talks. So if there are 2 videos that you have to watch after, no matter what, it's going to be the 2015 one from Old Castle, which actually we have one person coming up from Q&A afterwards, And then the one from Dish on the side, they talk about how to break down content management, how they use web authoring to provide self-service, and go into a much deeper depth than what we'll go today. The Sprint one is also fantastic, and they also talk about server topology. It's another great reference, but if you're just looking for best practices around web authoring, those two are fantastic. An additional question lots of people usually have following a demo like that is, okay, well, tell me how good it is compared to desktop. Information Lab updates, and I actually work with the person who creates the viz on the Information Lab to continue to update this as frequently as we can. Right now, Desktop 1 and Desktop 2 training sits at about 85% completely in web authoring. The vast majority of the things that you can do, you can actually do in web authoring. Give it a try. It'll probably work for the majority of your users, and it's worked out quite well. Okay. So some of you are wondering, great, we know it's on the server, but that can be tough. What are some best practices I need to be considering? Before we dive into it, talk to your sales consultant or your sales success manager or whoever your technical or your technical contact with Tableau is. The reason why is because you can think of them as your Tableau coach. These are the folks that are going to be able to give you some best practices to help set you up for success tomorrow, but also 3 years from now as you scale. Every case is a little bit different, and we'll talk about a few best practices, but definitely they're going to be your great first point of contact. Okay, let's talk about some best practices. Again, we're setting up tools. We're still in the balance phase. Desktop and server both work like this. You drag a pill over, and it says, give me all the resources you can to make this as fast as possible. It's great. It's the Tableau magic. Here's where things get a little interesting, though. And this is why we think about the number of cores or the amount of hardware you'll need. Desktop, it's essentially 4 to 8 cores dedicated to one person. It's fantastic. It's one of the reasons why it's fast. On server, depending on your size, we usually start like 8, 16. I argue you might want more. Here's why. Let's take the example where one person's in desktop on a 4-core machine. Both of these laptops actually are 4 cores, if not more. And on the server, we're going to do 4 times that size, 16 cores. When you have more people working on the server as it's shared, you're going to essentially divide the number of cores out. So for 2 to 4 people, it's going to be about 4 to 8 cores each. Not bad, same as a laptop. 16 people, 1 core. 32 people working at the exact same time, so like a training course, half a core. I'll do the math for you. 800% lower. 8 times slower than what you could expect with desktop. It's essentially like saying, hey, I want you to wear this 600-pound suit, go swim, and expect the same results. It's not going to work. It's going to drown. So what are some things that we can do, or things that I think are top of mind to ask or start questioning to make sure that this doesn't happen? Well, there's really 3. The first one is to think about web authors the same way you think about desktop users. The problems in the workbooks that they're creating may not be as complicated, but they're still dragging and dropping pills the exact same as a desktop user. The second is to seriously consider the number of people that are going to be on Tableau server at the same time. Don't lowball the number, and the reason why you don't want to lowball it is because you want to monitor your CPU usage. So as a sprinter, I was used to racing all out for something equivalent to a 100-meter dash. But if I wanted to run a 5K, I couldn't go 100% all the time. I wouldn't survive, or a hill would kill me. I have to go about 80% of effort, and then if I needed to expel the extra energy on a hill or near the end of the race, I had the energy to do that. Same thing with the server. You kind of want to give yourself a little bit of wiggle room. You will have spikes in activity, and that's great. You just want to plan for it. Again, this is where we're going to go fast. So write down the topics that you're interested in. Tableau Blueprint, fantastic resource to take a look at. If you're interested in performance, these are the talks that are going on at the conference. If you aren't able to get in, you can always look up at the videos afterwards on YouTube. Here are some of the resources that I've used previously. Again, all available online. And that's essentially working on the tools. Okay, so we talked about the tools, setting up for best practices. Well, what about for at scale? How can we continue to expand some of these best practices and ensure they stay? Well, let's take a step back and think about some of the basic goals that we have. We've talked a lot about ensuring that people have the right level of granularity for their data. We've talked about ensuring that people have a safe place to store some of their drafts. And we've talked about ensuring that it's equally easily to find those ones that are vetted and approved by the folks who are creating it. Okay, so I've downloaded Tableau Online or a server, or I've started a Tableau Online instance. Who's seen this page and gone, what do I do next? Everybody knew what to do? I definitely, like when I first logged into online, I saw this and I was like, what next? This is where we're going to talk about folder structures. So we're going to go through 3 different folder structures. We're going to go through a personal sandbox, only one that I can see. We're going to do a kind of coaching corner, very similar to the one we saw, where you can share content for review. And we're going to have an approved content section for other people to view. Of course, we want to think about the user licenses as well. The questions we're going to ask are, who are the people publishing content, and what content are they allowed to publish? Is there an approval process to move it up from a draft state to an approved state? And who does that approval? So we're going to go through 3 individual steps. We're going to start simple and then get more complex as we go. The first one, no distinction between publisher types. There's no approval process. And workbook creators can promote their own content. Here's what I mean. So in the first one, we have a content maker who's under a creator license or a desktop professional. Here's their personal sandbox that's available to publish content that only they can see. Here's the little department sandbox, so they can publish it for their team or get reviewed. This is where the coaches' corners lived, where your templates could also live. And here, you have that approved kind of swimmer's corner that we had, where the swimmers can then take a look at the folders. So that's the simple one. Let's go to intermediate. This one, we're going to have distinct publisher types. So we're going to have people who publish data sources and people who publish workbooks. We have an approval process, but we still allow those workbook creators to promote the content. So we're starting with our simple one again, and we're going to create a new folder on the left side. This one specifically is for data sources. The reason why, I'm going to reference the talk that talks more in depth about this, but there's some permission reasons why you want that separate. Here you have a data source maker who's publishing those certified data sources to this folder. The workbook creator can then reference those data sources and publish them to any of the 2 folders that they've started. And the reason why 2 is because we now have this content approver with a viewer license that looks at the department sandbox and then gives the OK to the workbook maker to promote it up to the approved content. So this is the intermediate flow. We'll step it up one more time. So what changed here is the same same distinct publishers of data source and workbooks. It's going to be the same approval process. The things that are going to be different is that we're not going to allow those workbook creators to promote their content, and you'll see why in a minute. And we're going to actually have an ad hoc analysis, so allowing people to do kind of one-off workbooks. And we're going to be OK with that. So here's the intermediate flow that we just walked through. We're going to shove that all to the left. Don't worry, it's all the same. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to introduce the ad hoc creator. And that's going to be down here. This ad hoc workbook creator or workbook maker is like an Explorer license. They only have access to web authoring. But that's OK, because they're given access to the certified data sources, and they can publish to both a personal content box or their department box. And the content approver can approve content as they see fit. The next thing we're going to do, though, is that we now have a mix of ad hoc analysis and those official larger ones that we want people to look at. We actually are going to separate those 2 out. So here, we've separated out the approved workbooks, so those broad swimmer vizzes that we showed from Tableau Public before. But here's where I could have saved that little medal count to show that Michael Phelps was a top athlete overall. An approved promoter can move it from a department sandbox or an ad hoc workbook up. And now the viewers or the swimmers can have access to both the ones that we've officially vetted and the ones that are more single stories. But the folders are separate so they can still see the difference between the two. They know that it's coming from a different place. This, again, is going to be where we go a little bit fast and write down the topics you want to deep dive later. If you want more on this talk was done last year, 2018-3. It talks about the exact folder structure that I went through. It also goes into detail with how nested folders work, how user groups and permissions work as well, and most importantly, how you can create a personal sandbox on your server. Andy Cotgreave also does a great blog post on this. Ann Ho, who actually presented at Vision, she is actually doing a talk on content management and some of the hacks to provide. That's later on Friday. Take a look at that. And of course, Blueprint covers this topic a little bit as well. Row-level security. So again, we're not going to go into detail with these, but if you want to talk about it more, write it down as a question. Row-level security, the two things that I would take away mainly is thinking about user filters and calculated fields and how you can apply those. Again, the talk that I referenced here is great for that. We also have 2 talks at TC. These 2 talks are available, and again, look them up afterwards if you aren't able to get in. Now we're going to talk about 2 different best practices. Here's the first one, server cleanup. So sometimes you have all of this new ad hoc, either workbooks or data sources that sometimes aren't used very often. Matt Coles has done a great blog post, and actually we can talk a little bit more about this example, where you can automate a script to clean things up on any cadence you want. So let's say every 6 months it combs through server and then starts to mark things to say, nobody has viewed this in the last little while. I'm going to email the creator and say, OK, we're going to delete this kind of 2 months from now. And if you don't hear back, we're going to clean it up off the server. It's been really successful for a few customers to help manage the load. And finally, training. So Oldcastle and Dish talked a little bit about this, but training is extremely important, and it's going to be really hard, especially for those folks who are used to Excel. There's a few different things you can do. First one is setting up a fundamentals training course before people get started with web authoring or Tableau in general, as I'm sure you're all familiar with. Using your own content is a great way to help make it easy and familiar for people to get started. The second one is going to be having a regular cadence to continue to learn new things about Tableau. This can be internal to your team, meeting every month or so, or you can take advantage of the Tableau user groups. They've been fantastic, and they're usually all over in multiple cities throughout the world. And the third one that I've started to talk about a little bit more recently is separating your training server from your production server, if you know that you're going to do a big training web authoring server. And the reason why is because if we think back on the load or the number of concurrent users, this way you can separate the training that ends up happening, spin up the number of servers that you need, have a ton of people interact with the web, but it's separate from your production, and you know that it won't be affected if something goes wrong. You can also then tear it down when you don't need it, so you can manage costs that way too. Okay, so we covered a lot. First, we talked about the culture, where we talked about moving away from the traditional reporting and into what we're considering a new self-service analytics, so that lifelong athlete. We talked about providing the right tools, so the differences that can happen between viewing a report versus using web authoring to answer more questions. We talked a little bit about how desktop and server, the differences there and what to consider when setting up the number of cores or hardware that you need. And finally, we talked about organizing content, and specifically around different folder structures and users. There's a ton of topics that we didn't cover or just barely brushed, and that's where we're going to try something a little bit different. So pull out your phones. We're going to try this thing called Slido.com. You can scan the QR code. It'll take you right there. And what's going to happen is you can type in your questions directly into Slido.com. You can upvote ones that other people have already submitted for the ones that you want to hear more about, and then you can add your own. What we're going to do is we're actually going to bring up these 3 folks. I'm going to put this off to the side too so you can see. Presentation mode. And we're going to bring up 3 folks from Tableau to help answer these questions. So Lauren is an SC out of the Boston area. She's focused on financial services, banking, and anything. One other thing? No, that's good. Okay. Lovecash is actually from the Bay Area, working in a lot of the big tech. And Paul is actually based out of Atlanta, Georgia, if you remember. Yep. And worked at Oldcastle, that 2015 talk that I talked a lot about. He was actually a customer before Tableau and can talk about how he helped build self-service throughout his organization. So why don't you come on up and we'll start some of the chats. Woo.
I got it.
Sorry? Yeah. I'm going to swap to here.
Okay.
Yeah.
There we go. So if you go slido.com and then use that hashtag, you can pop that up. How do I keep my hair looking so good? We'll see the upvotes on that. That's where voting's going to come in handy.
Checking it too.
Okay, so to get started, we talked a lot about web authoring overall and some of the benefits. But I'm sure some folks are curious, when would you not want to use web authoring?
When would I not want to use authoring? So I think as Kevin took that example of you guys kind of just saying, hey, what if I have another question that the parameters and filters are not going to answer, right? What if I don't know what's behind the scenes? So what if I have data sources that are, I don't know, 20, 30, 40, 50 columns that I don't know? So I would not open web authoring in front of my exec who says, hey, can you answer me this question? If I'm comfortable about the data, sure, I'll open it up. But if you're not, I think that's where your first impression that you're going to leave your exec with, well, I don't even know the data, I'm going to start dragging and dropping fields. Just think about the impact it can have. Having said that, I think Kevin did cover a lot of times that you do use web authoring, and I'll say one thing. I have little kids, both going to elementary school, and there was one time that I told them I'm going to install something, and they both kind of looked at me like, what? Like, what does installation mean? So we are in that world where we're not installing stuff. We're just going to the browser. We're just doing some things, right? So I think I lean towards that mentality now, try to use web authoring as much as I can. But if I'm not sure what's behind the scenes, maybe take a step back, think about it a little bit. Yeah.
So one of the things that I can say too, when my customers ask me, who should we be giving web authoring to, who should we not, and when should we be using it for creation purposes, one of the things I usually advise them is if you remember that list that Kevin put up in terms of the different capabilities in web authoring, most of the things that were not available were all formatting. So what I usually say is if people are trying to do ad hoc analytics, web authoring is a really great tool for that. They can basically use it to do table calculations, to answer any kind of questions that they have that's based on the view, that's based on data. But if you're trying to do heavily formatted reports that are going to go up to your executives in production, that's an area where I would still advise using desktop, because the formatting capabilities just aren't quite there yet. And maybe that's something that we're adding, but that's usually the delineation I help people draw.
Yeah. At Oldcastle, we took a two-pronged approach. There was only one developer. How many here consider themselves a Tableau developer, developing content? One developer, 6,000 users over 256 manufacturing facilities. So when I authored a web or a dashboard, the first thing I would get is, oh, I need this filter, I need that filter, I want to change up the viz types. I'm sure everybody has that. Well, we didn't want to go to the age-old where we had 12 different reports all on the same sales data set, but customized for individual users. What we decided was we'd have one enterprise dashboard that would answer about 80% of the questions, okay? And any good dashboard is always going to raise additional questions. So we then developed curated data sets that were built on the same exact extract of the enterprise dashboards that then we allowed web authors to use. And keep in mind, this was in 2014 on version 8.3. You couldn't even create a calculated field using web authoring. So they were highly curated, very organized into folders. We allowed we had 2,000 Tableau server users, about half were web authors. So we had a curated data set. We only allowed about 4 or 5 data sets, sales, procurement, maybe general ledger, and we would point them to that. They would automatically drop onto a template, and from that template they were able to drag and drop and start to build out their own ad hoc analysis. So we took the approach that the ad hoc analysis was going to be solely for them. They had their own personal project folder. If we did see that there was a lot of usage, that was garnering a lot of interest, then we would look at that and then promote that potentially to a enterprise visualization. So that was the approach that we took, and it really took the weight off the sole developer, me, shoulder, by not having to make all these changes that might affect, only for one user's consumption.
Yeah. So it's actually interesting you mentioned in your organization being able to give a lot of access to a bunch of people. I'm kind of curious, from all of your perspectives, we talked a little bit about server best practices and how to set up server to be, good or good enough. What are some things that we either didn't cover or things that we really need to double click on that are important when you have those conversations with different customer types?
I can go first. So I think you did cover that, like about the resources. So I'm in the Bay Area supporting a lot of large enterprise customers. These are customers that have been using Tableau for 4 or 5 longer, some of them 10 years. So none of them are new to the concept. They also come from a very desktop heavy mentality, because web authoring didn't launch at the same time as desktop did. So they almost think like desktop is the only way to do things. Now, as we're going towards seeing web authoring almost getting to that parity, and they want to do this, question that I get asked is, what is it going to do to my server, right? What are some of the things that I should think about? I think that thought process of a coach really fits well here. You have to coach them to do the right thing, whether it's curated data sources. Sure, I might have a data source with 500 fields. Maybe in the beginning, I can give them a copy of that with 50 most commonly used fields. Let people kind of start that. The new people that are coming into your organizations, the new creators, if you will, maybe expose them to web authoring first. Coach them to go there first, because 80-85% of what they're going to do might already be handled by web authoring. And on the server side, I love the concept of A/B testing, right? Just use that because it's on the server, because you're getting the data all in the Postgres. You can start looking at what people are really doing with it, and how do I actually think about scaling it for the next 1 year, 2 year, 3 years. And sizing for peak capacity is the way you want to think about. Not sizing for the average load, size for peak capacity. So just think about some of those things. I think that might be helpful.
Yep. I think that if any of you guys were in the keynote this morning, you might have seen some of the server management add-on features that they had shown in there. That's something that I see people going to quite a bit. So there's a resource monitoring tool that's going to be released in that, and it helps you gauge exactly how much CPU your server is taking up. It helps you see exactly when the backgrounders are working and other types of resource contention that you might have. So really tracking those things and understanding, okay, if Monday morning at 9 a.m. is when your peak capacity is going to be, but then at 11 a.m. is when people are going to be web authoring the most because they're actually trying to act on what they saw at 9, understanding those types of actions are going to be really important for you as a server admin. And you can use, like I said, the resource monitoring tool to do that, or if you're not going to buy the server management add-on, you could also use Tableau, which is an open source tool, a little bit less supported, but it does work, it'll get you there. So just understanding those habits of people can be really helpful. The other thing I'll say is that, like Lavkesh, I deal with a lot of different size deployments. For smaller deployments, you can probably get away kind of with that simpler deployment model that you had said in there. But for some of the larger deployments, what I've actually seen some of my customers doing is having their production server and then having a separate server that's more ad hoc analysis. Now, they're both fully licensed, so it's not like you're using your non-prod instance of Tableau server to do that. But by doing that, you can much more easily manage the type of resource contention that's on there as well, so that your production server always has the best performance, and then people go to this more ad hoc server where they have the capability to web author and do these types of things. So just different types of approaches like that to think about, but definitely as you scale, you have to decide what approach is best for you, and that's just some ideas in terms of what people have done.
We touched on this briefly, but I would say, aside from the server considerations, make sure that the extract that you are going against has meaningful variable names, that it's organized in a way that a business user is going to understand, not with a bunch of underscores and names that no one can misinterpret. It's also important, one of the first visualizations I created was a word cloud of a data dictionary so that everybody knew. We called it margin contribution, somebody else might call it profit, but they knew exactly what the EBITDA calculations were, so that there was a sense that, and people go, well, yeah, I know what profit margin is. It's, our profit divided by sales, but you would, if you've been in finance for any amount of time, you can know that people tend to then, game that a little bit by changing the calculations slightly. So it's important to have a standardized set of calculations so that when people are dragging and dropping that, they have confidence that that is the number.
Cool. All right, we're going to try and swap to the questions.
First question is for you,
First
Kevin.
question around is for me. Apparently people still, well, interesting. Okay, well, for the gentleman in the room, first off, blow dry your hair immediately after you shower. And then use towel dry, which is a clay that you can buy on Amazon for pretty cheap. Think we answered that? Is that pretty successful? Okay. Okay, next question. How do you inspire change management in an old school org, and how do we best set up fundamentals training for success?
Oh, my word. I'll tell you, there is a paradigm shift. But it's coming slowly. It used to be that when someone walked into my office, they said, show me how to get to the report, okay? As we've been more progressive, and I'm no longer working for Oldcastle, I'm now working proudly for Tableau. But I noticed during the end of my tenure there, the question shifted from show me where to get the report to show me where the data is. Okay, so there is a paradigm shift out there. It is slowly but surely coming that way. I wish I had a wand because I would show some beautiful visualizations, and in the back of the room there would always be Mr. Black Cloud that goes, can I download that in Excel? It's something I spent months on, and that was highly interactive, and they want to see it in Excel format. You just have to coach those people. There is, if you can find it, there's a visualization out there. It may have been done by Stephen Few about finding the nines. And I've used this at some of my Georgia Tech lectures, is that I just show a grid that's 12 by 12, it's 144, of random numbers 1 through 12. And I ask them, first question, anybody consider 144 data points big data? And nobody raises their hand. But then I say, how many nines are there? And I wait, and then slowly but surely they start saying, oh, I think there's 12. Well, that's wrong. And then I just click a button and it highlights how many nines are there. Well, the old school way of trying to find data in a massive crosstab, it's slowly but surely, it is gone. It's just, we have to coax those people and show them that there's a much better way to really quick, because you don't want to spend 20 minutes finding a number that you should have been finding in 5 seconds. And you just have to convince them. But I wish there was a magic wand.
Any other things to add there?
So in terms of change management, maybe this isn't so much change management, but it's in terms of coaching people. I've seen people take a couple of different approaches. The first is I've actually seen companies just disable downloading data, which is, I'm sure, very, very controversial in this room. But I have seen it done, and I've seen it successful as well. It needs to come top down, though. It can't be from somebody just saying, I'm going to create this dashboard and disable downloading data. But if a management person says, no, for security reasons, we're not letting people download data, but you can have web authoring, that's a pretty good way to get people on board with web authoring in terms of data exploration. A second thing I've seen people do, and you alluded to this when I was talking to you earlier, is actually putting a link to training right on the dashboard or right in the place where the person is. So whether that's an internal training that you guys create with your own data, or whether that's a link to Tableau's training, you could easily do something like that. And then the third thing I've seen people do, and this is a little bit more out there, but you can actually do some pretty creative things with the extensions API to actually teach people how to interact with the dashboards, and you can actually make it move around the dashboard in terms of and it's hard to explain, but basically like a pop-up that says, drag this here in order to understand this. And so it almost actually walks people through doing that, so they're not going to a separate outside video. The training lives right in the dashboard. And so I've seen a couple of different approaches, but it depends on the culture of your organization in terms of what you think would be most effective. But I think providing that training is really important in terms of getting to the change.
Cool. All right. Next question. Can web edit users use their own data?
Can I take that one? I'll take the easy ones.
Yeah, sure.
Yes, absolutely you can. In fact, that's one of the reasons one of my customers started embracing web authoring. They were like, hey, most of our creators know what they're doing. They want to do it in the desktop. We don't want to disable that. All's good. But then they had this instance where their databases actually sit in a different network zone as individual employees. So databases are in a secured zone. The only applications that are allowed to connect to databases are server applications, right? And this is something that I'm seeing more and more of happening. That's how they feel secure about their data. So there's two completely separate network zones. Your laptop cannot connect to anything that's within a secured zone. If you need to go to a server, and that server needs to connect. If you think about that concept, that's basically securing data. Web authoring kind of gets you there, right? So web authoring, as a creator, I can make a connection directly to a database from that interface and start asking my questions. That's just one example. The second is actually just taking the point that Lauren talked about, which is downloading data, right? So if you're doing most of the things on web authoring, guess what's interacting with the data? It's Tableau server application, right? Tableau server is the one that's doing it. You're doing it in your desktop, you are kind of sending that data back and forth. So it actually eliminates some of that risk for some of the folks who think about where should data be, and I don't want that sitting on your desktops. But yeah, to answer that question, it was a simple yes, but I took a few minutes to kind of get there.
That's all right. So for those who couldn't hear, the question was, I thought web authors couldn't have access to their own data, and that it was creators, was that piece? Right.
Right, so I think what you're doing is you're distinguishing between what a creator and an explorer as a licensing model, what they do. So you're absolutely correct. A creator is the one that's creating it, but again, the way I'm processing this is a creator is basically a user who was using desktop before, right? And now they're looking at an alternative doing the same thing through a browser. So yes, as long as you are a creator, you could do the things on desktop, but you could also create database connections, upload files, and do the same thing, and essentially publish that data out. So yes, you can. I think if you're thinking, can an explorer do it? No, but that's a licensing model. That's less of a technical discussion, but more of a what license do you want to give people who want to use their own data versus others who want to use data that others have published. Does that help clarify?
So basically, you're categorizing web author to be an explorer, not to be a developer.
I mean, that would apply to most. So again, the question is, we're kind of taking web authoring and splitting it into creator, explorer. That would apply to almost anything in Tableau, right? So what can you do? Can you download full data? Certain people can, certain people cannot. So it all becomes like a licensing model and then your governance model on top of that. Does that help? Yeah. Okay.
All right, we're going to try and blast through a couple more questions. So what's the best way to create a personal folder for every user that needs one? Do you have to do this manually?
I can tell you we did it manually, but you can script tab command to make that an automated. Just to kind of give you an overview, we had roughly 2,000 Tableau users on a 24-core environment. Roughly half of those, so 1,000 were web authors. Now they didn't ramp up all at once. That's over a multi-year period. It started out as a very small group, 20 or so, and then the popularity started to really spin, and so we just kept adding the folders. So we probably were getting maybe 1 or 2 folder requests a week when I left, so it wasn't out, you know, it wasn't crazy to manage. If you're trying to scale that to a much larger organization, then you probably want to script that.
Yeah, almost all my customers use the REST API to create their folders, so just, you can.
Can I add to that question? So there's another way, a hack kind of, to create a personal folder. So basically you create one folder, and then it's viewable for everybody, and then you turn off the view workbook permission for everybody. So the only person who can see the file are either the administrators and the owner of the file. So basically that means even though everyone published the workbook in the same folder, they can only see the workbooks owned by themselves. So it kind of becomes a hacky way of a personal folder, but yeah.
Yeah, that's actually directly referencing the blog as well that Andy Cocker gave, but thank you, Sean. That's Sean Lee, by the way. He's a product manager at Tableau as well, so thanks for sharing that. Okay, I think we have time for one more. So we mentioned that desktop users use computer resources and server uses server resources, but what resources does web authoring use?
You want me to take it?
Whatever, yeah, go ahead.
No, you should.
Okay. So they're using the server resources. Web authoring is primarily using the server resources. It depends a little bit on if you're connecting with an extract or a live data source connection in terms of the different processes that you would be using. But overall, in terms of the drag and drop, you want to be looking out for the VizQL process if you're monitoring those types of tasks. And then, but yeah, it is going to be using your server CPU.
Yep.
And then whatever you want.
That's good. I think the one thing I was just thinking about is if you're thinking about making people want to use web authoring and you don't know where to start, one idea may be that we're just getting people all in a training session and say, hey, let's introduce you to web authoring. And as we do that, if people are all going to do something at the same time, we could actually monitor that later on as well, like whether it's resource monitoring tool or just other monitoring tools that you use. That would actually give you a sense of what is that peak potentially going to look like. But the way I look at the resource being used is no different than people interacting with a dashboard that's already built out, right? So if I'm doing a drag and drop, it's creating visualization. If somebody's doing a filter, it's changing the visualization. It's going to be basically the same thing.
So just mostly VizQL processes?
Mostly VizQL processes, but again, depending on where the data is, there might be some other things, whether it's data server, and then where the data is, again, it's going to the database or not, but it's mostly VizQL.
All right.
Yep.
Well, thanks everyone. Please give a big round of applause to Lauren, Lovekish, and Paul, especially for coming out. And thank you for those that have stayed. Please do rate this experience in this session in the app. It's a bit of a new one that we've tried. We do look at this afterwards, and we definitely adjust talks or choose which ones to continue or not continue in later conferences. So please do send your feedback. And of course, thank you for joining and taking a look at web authoring, discovering self-service. And if you have any questions for us, well, I'll stick around. You guys don't have to stick around. But you can also reach out to my email, and we'll have that available as well. Thanks, everyone.